Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. This episode joined by an Aussie vet. I think we kind of broke the mold. We stayed in the vet world, but we're going down under. Oh man, here I go with one of those long intros because it's not really down under. It's just a little bit south. Because he's not down under now. Craig Dempsey, founder of Is Latin Hub. Did I get it right? Gummit. I hope I did.
That is right, gents.
Great to have you, man. Appreciate you taking some time out of the day. And in the soon to be, just to lead us in with an insight of your company's birthday. How many years has your company been around now?
Look, it's first up, thanks for having me. Much appreciated, gents. It was a pleasure to have a chat with some fellow vets. Look, today's it's a coincidence more than anything else, but today's actually our 7th birthday as a company, which has obviously had its ups and downs, as you can appreciate. But it's always good to take a moment, reflect, and just to sort of see where we sort of come from. And I guess the most challenging part for myself today is I actually need to give a speech in Spanish to the entire company. Now, clearly being an Australian, the Spanish is not my native language. I've got a reasonable level. However, giving sort of speeches to large audiences is not something I would do on a regular basis.
That's funny because I got trained notice I say got trained in a couple of languages. I don't speak them, but I got trained in them. I know that even just in the class to stand up and give a dialogue in a foreign language is a huge hurdle in that ability to speak that language. So we're pulling for you. Camden's fiance could give you some pointers, but she speaks Mexican Spanish, and you're not speaking Mexican Spanish down there. So yeah, it's one of those things.
Getting a lot of empathy from us up here as we're writing our for our bilingual wedding here in just a few weeks. So yeah, no, we are here supporting you, Craig.
No, look, appreciate that, guys. And look, one of the unique things is that we've got offices in 16 countries. And therefore, I think in the company, off the top of my head, we have like 23, 24 nationalities. And most of those offices are across Latin America. So we have everything from Mexican Spanish through to Chilean, Argentine, Peruvian, etc. And then we have people, for example, from Brazil who actually Spanish is not their first language, it's Portuguese. So it adds to a few levels of complexity, especially when Australian is speaking Spanish with I still have particularly when I'm speaking Spanish, quite a strong Australian accent. So at the very least, it will be interesting. And I'm sure after a couple of beers before I do it, it will go down swimmingly, no doubt.
Exactly. You'll know exactly what you're saying. So.
Well, at least somebody will. So that's all that matters. What do they say? Is that it's the intent that matters, not the outcome.
That's right.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Craig.
I was just going to say that's what I'm hoping for anyway.
That's right. Well, you said something earlier, and in that this being an anniversary day for your business, that you took some reflection, and I'd just love to, man. What was, I usually pick on the valley, the dark points, but what was like this moment in these 7 years that you were like, holy crap, this is unflippin' believable?
Look, I would say that, and to be fair, I generally have a mentality of perhaps reflecting on the lower points rather than the positive points. More so because I think you learn more from your failings than actually your successes. And I guess going back to, I think, year 2 or maybe in year 3, the reality is we perhaps got ahead of ourselves. We expanded a little bit faster than we'd originally planned. That meant we ended up hiring people perhaps with a little less vetting than we should have. We gave them a little less training and supervision, etc. And what we found is a number of those people basically went off the reservation, so to speak. And we found a number of our offices that were quite profitable suddenly were not profitable anymore. And what we basically got the position that the company had a number of debts. So you have to bite your tongue, swallow your pride, walk to the bank account, my personal bank account, withdraw a whole bunch of money, walk back and deposit into the company. So I guess that was probably something, the largest learning curve I have at that point, based on the fact that, after 2 years, things were going swimmingly. This is great. Let's expand. Let's do this. Let's do that. And then you sort of have that sort of moment. Fortunately, we're well past that and things are going much better these days. But it definitely allowed me to reflect on, at the end of the day, if you can surround yourself by the best people that you can afford, being practical, and that you can keep, that is the best thing you can do as a business owner.
I'm really curious. We were joking some before we started recording here about the 7th birthday party today. And aside from your speech, which I'm sure will be amazing, I'm really curious how it has been connecting virtually with your team, especially around an event like this where you would normally like to be celebrating in person, bringing people together, and getting that face-to-face interaction. How have you been able to adjust to that?
Sure. Look, obviously, the last couple of years has been different for everybody. Particularly, obviously, Camden more than most, that, in Latino culture specifically, face-to-face means a lot more than perhaps, what we could call ourselves from the, North America, Australia, etc., perhaps a little bit colder, in regards to how we operate, a bit slightly more business-like. So it is important. And historically, I used to visit, all our offices and things very regularly. And that was important to build those relationships, etc. What has that meant? Yes, we've had to change how we operate. I've actually ended up bringing in extra staff for management positions, perhaps to give them a little bit more time to physically spend their time talking to officers, etc. We've had to, enforce, more formalized structures about having meetings regularly, doing reports and all these sorts of things. Just why? To force that level of communication that naturally you would have had anyway by physical presence. So it is different. It has resulted in some complications. It depends between our offices, depending on the specific countries, the cultures, but also, how COVID has been, affected the country, or the perception of it as much as anything else. Some countries have definitely taken their stride. Some perhaps have taken a little bit more to heart. You've had to do things such as, perhaps using what's Rappi, which is like a delivery service, or Uber Eats type thing. We've had to send out, pizzas and things to people's houses and that sort of stuff. I know for this week, for the celebrations, we've basically grouped geographic areas together and done a quiz for the different areas, where the quiz has been questions about the company, for example. So today we'll announce the winners of that. But conversely, we've also got a slightly more, let's call it a jovial thing, where people have submitted pet photos of their pets celebrating the company birthday. So that will also be selected. And just between us, I did submit my pet into that competition. I do expect to win.
Oh, that's a lot of fun there. Well, I'm really curious. You mentioned working in 16 different countries, and you touched on it for a moment there, talking about how in a lot of Latin cultures, the face-to-face is such an important thing. So I'd kind of like to shift the conversation some to dealing with those cultural barriers inside of those countries, working with different places. And you can touch on during the COVID times, but even just beyond that, just going to different places to do business. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure, obviously doing business in every jurisdiction is quite different. And as you'll probably know from your experience, lots of parts of the world will generalize Latin America, fine, it's all the same. But as you very much know, a Mexican, from a characteristic and personality point of view, is very different to a Colombian, to an Argentine, a Chilean, for example. So one of the key things what we find is clients particularly generalize, well, they all speak the same language, well, more or less they assume, and therefore they must all be the same. So we do spend a lot of our time trying to explain that, look, at the end of the day, culturally, how you manage the people from those jurisdictions, but also what you can expect from them, etc., is quite different. It is, for example, you'll find that, let's say Chile, for example, can trace a lot of its history back to Germany. Argentina can trace a lot of its history back to Italy. You find Mexico is far more influenced by the US, etc. And obviously those influences make significant differences to, let's call it, work ethic, to how they believe, the interface between, employee and boss, and all these sorts of things in the environment. So it's quite interesting. But then conversely, you just have some peculiarities. Here's a simple one that it's a Colombian one. Almost every document you legally sign in Colombia you actually need to fingerprint. You have to take an ink fingerprint and put your fingerprint on the piece of paper. It's one of those peculiar things that I've never done anywhere else in the world, but it's something that happens in Colombia, which is unique. So there are various peculiarities that are for the particular jurisdictions. But at the end of the day, everything is workable here. People are definitely happy, perhaps happier and a little bit warmer. But then you also have some things, for example, another Colombian thing is they have the second largest number of public holidays in the world, for example. I think it's the second largest. So try to explain those concepts as well. But, the reality is Latin America and other parts of the world, perhaps, they do, at least in their understanding, have a slightly different balance between making money work and life, living life. So whereas, conversely, what does every 12-year-old, kid in the US wants to do? They want to become a billionaire and they want to be famous. Whereas, a lot of people here are 12 years old, realistically, what they want to do is make enough money that on the Friday afternoon, they can sit on plastic chairs at the local store and have beers with their friends, or they want to spend time with their families, etc. So it's a little bit different. But, conversely, it also presents a lot of great opportunities and learnings and trying to navigate those complexities between those different cultures and to try and find that common ground. As I said, we operate with 22, 23, whatever the nationalities is, which is all the Latin nationalities. Plus we have Swiss, we have English, we have Australians, we have Americans. I'm sure we have Italians and a few other varieties also through the group as well. So, it makes every day entertaining at the very least.
Yeah, you hit on something that's one of my favorite subjects, and I do a lot of coaching for soon-to-be veterans, helping them transition back to service into the civilian job market, if you will. And one of the things I always talk to them about is, you got all the know-how and the processes, because the military taught you that. It's ingrained into your DNA. Now you just got to learn the new language. And I think it's really interesting, really cool that you are living that daily. And I'm curious, when you transitioned, now you went Aussie Army, and then you were in corporate world, and then you started a business, right? That's kind of the linkage, correct?
Yeah, look, I left the military, actually transitioned into the mining sector, into the corporate world in Australia, then found myself with mining working in Canada, and then Canada found myself in Peru working in mining, then ended up in Colombia heading up a large engineering company. Then after that, moved into setting my own business and stuff up.
Yeah. So, with that core, did you feel it? Did you feel that awkwardness, or did it come a bit more natural to you? Because some guys, just to kind of give you why I'm asking this, some of these military guys, that they want to wear their rank. They want to, that they think that because they held this rank in the military, they should hold this rank in the corporate world, and they should everything should be talked and handled the same. And it's a really shock to them. So I'm curious, was it conscious for you, or was it unconscious? Now you look back and go, wow, look at all that.
Look, and I guess I'm slightly also going on a tangent here. I do remember leaving the military, then working in mining. And for whatever reason, this large mining company, which is the third or fourth largest in the world at the time, probably still is, I was one of the first, at least in Australia, the people that actually taken from the military. And it worked out quite well. So I ended up referring quite a lot of my friends and bosses, etc., who actually ended up coming and joining the same company. I was fortunate. I landed actually in the company within a few weeks. I was promoted, and I was promoted a couple of times in quite a short period of time. But I remember speaking to a colonel who I used to work for in the army, and I remember speaking with him and saying, look, the reality is when you transition out, you can be anything you want to be. Just because you were a colonel, you could leave and become a general. You were a colonel, you could become a corporal. It really depends. At the end of the day, you can reinvent yourself. It's an opportunity. It's refreshing. And look, being practical, I basically transitioned out as a captain, and at least, the equivalent, I guess, in the mining world probably ended up being, a one-star general within a few years, I guess, being practical, where conversely that colonel who left initially transitioned out and probably was a lieutenant for the job he took. Because, the reality is you can be anything you want. it is a difficult transition. You do need to understand how to make that psychological change, how to speak differently, but conversely, also back yourself. There are a lot of good skills you do learn from the military, such as discipline, understanding of processes, ability and willingness to try and achieve a goal. But conversely, look, the reality is there's also some weaknesses from the military. And this is particularly more from a startup point of view. In the military, you do everything to achieve the mission, whatever that may be. Now, the reality is sometimes that means you're so focused on doing that, everything else gets dropped. Now, if you apply that same thing, perhaps even the corporate world or entrepreneurial world, the reality is sometimes achieving the mission at all costs is actually not the right outcome. Sometimes you need to stop and realize, hey, I actually need to pivot here and go a different direction, which is quite uncharacteristic of what you're taught in the military. So, there are some things to learn. And another thing that came to me when I left is, one thing I loved about the military, and it's the probably thing I respect most, is more or less, at least at the lower levels, in your platoons, companies, battalions, etc. Everybody's there trying to achieve the same goal. Okay, they're trying to, whatever that may be. However, once you do leave that, and particularly in corporates and even your own companies, etc., it's very rare that you're you're surrounded by people who are really trying to achieve the same thing. Often everyone has their own agendas. Some people perhaps trying to achieve it, but just not fully focused on it. Or someone's trying to achieve something completely different. And they're different things, they're different challenges, but, I do think vets do have a lot to offer. But there is that gap, and they need to be confident, but not arrogant. Yes, they need to take their skills, but they also need to accept that whilst they can be anybody, they also need to be humble and willing to learn. If they were a general, no one gives it, no one cares. If they were a private, nobody cares. The reality is people rate them on what they are. It's a rebirth, so to speak.
I love that, and I'm gonna steal this from my friend Jen. Jen told me this, man, I don't remember how many years ago, but it's quite a while back. This story, and really it holds so true, because here we are in the military. We've achieved this rank through 20 years, 5 years, whatever you've achieved that rank, and then we have this thought, for some reason it gets plugged into our head, that because I'm here, I should be able to just go to corporate America and be here. And she said to me, it's like, you've been doing that job that you're doing for the last 20 years. And are you going to take somebody off the street and put them sitting right next to you to replace you that doesn't have the experience behind all that stuff that you've been doing and all that? And I was like, oh, what a dose of reality. I mean, because that goes back to what you were saying, is some of these, some guys and gals, when they get out, they think they should just transition to it's a lateral transfer, just like I've been doing in the military. And the reality is, no, you've got to learn, you've got to develop those skills in a different fashion. And what I'm curious, you've kind of touched on it, but I always like to know, what's a nugget from your time in the service that you carry with you as that core thing that you revert back to, whether it's a value or a lesson or something like that is just, it's been there since the day you left the Army, whenever that was. I lost the math on that, but yeah.
Look, I think I left the Army 10, 11 years ago. I'm really not sure myself these days. Look, what is the most important thing that I reflect upon, or what I think I took away? Look, it's pretty simple, and to be fair, it doesn't also necessarily come from the military, but it's very simple. Don't expect others to do things that you wouldn't do yourself. It's pretty simple, realistically. If I want somebody to work on a weekend, I should expect myself to work on a weekend. As a simple example, I know I have a personal policy that if I have a staff member write me an email on an evening, on a weekend, or whatever the case may be, I will do my damnedest to respond as fast as possible. If they're willing to work after hours, or whatever that may be, then the very least I can do is respond to them as quickly as possible, as a sign of respect. I think that's one of the most important things. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be a great leader because you do that. It doesn't mean you're going to be a bad leader. but at the very least, it is one way to like, have respect of the people who work for you, and hopefully, that does comes in return. But I think that's probably the biggest nugget I have. And at the end of the day, as I was saying before, and at the end of the day, if you can surround yourself by the best people who can do what you want them to do, you'll probably be successful in whatever form that takes, whether you want to start your own business or you want to do something else. I guess if I was to reflect on something else, a weakness, to be fair, from the military as much as anything else is, whilst you have a lot of experience leading people, managing people, facilitating, negotiating, etc., the one thing that people in the military don't have real experience with or understanding is finances. At the end of the day, my company now, if we don't get paid enough money, I can't pay people's salaries. It's as simple as that. Little things like that you don't actually have in the military. Now, so I think there are some of these things that militaries, and to be fair, would actually be better if they did teach some of these sorts of things. They might actually become financially more efficient. Or at the very least, they should be things that perhaps are taught as a transition in order to make the people more successful. It's only going to be in the military's best interest that ex-people from the military go on to have successful lives, etc. I can't think of a better a way for retention, recruitment, or just general influence in society.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, how is that for one of those creative solutions when you start looking at military budget and all this stuff? It's like, we got to spend less. It's like, so we throw 3 accountants in there and see what happens. See how long that budget lasts that high once you get a couple of accountants working in there, right, Dad?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always had a blank check where, in the organizations I was in, we would talk about running out of money, but no, I mean, there was always more.
Exactly. And look, the reality is I don't know of a single private through to a general in the military that ever worries about can they pay salaries. Or the reality is way too many things. It's like budget doesn't matter because if we run out, we'll just get more money. And the reality is that's not how it should work. I understand that the military is something that's different and it has national aims, which is all not necessarily all about money and things. But the reality, if you could somehow educate, particularly the NCO and the officer corps and whatever militaries, to better understand finances and even incentivize if they could achieve, I guess the same objectives more efficiently from a financial point of view, it may end up working out a much better outcome for everybody because, the reality is so much wastage still exists. And, you hear the stories and it's across all the militaries that, the day before the battalion's budget is up, they will make sure they spend every cent this year just in the fact to make sure they get the same allocation or more next year, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, I think that's really interesting. And what I'm kind of dribbling towards, there's a word I haven't used in the show. And
you watching basketball last night or something?
I don't know what. Yeah, I watched the Cowboys blow it, but there's your date mark for the show. But although, side note, that could be every week if we're not careful. As a Cowboy fan, with a watching.
Every other week, stick with the 8-8. We've been doing it for 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I'm really now I've completely lost that whole train of thought because went into the sport world and now it's gone. But what I'm having fun with in my mind is the different offices and how you, going back to culture, how you establish your company culture. I actually had this discussion with a client the other night. It's, large corporations have their culture, but departments develop their own cultures, just like we did in the military. Our specific unit, or even a platoon would develop a culture. So I'm curious how you created that, overall company wide, and then how do you monitor it with all these remote sites that y'all operate in?
Look, it's a large challenge, and with these sorts of things, you also need to have, I guess, clear expectations and practically what you can do, because you can develop a culture in one country, but in the reality is it can't be copied and pasted across all the different countries because as simply as they're all slightly different. So what we try to, as much as anything else, is try to work on general values in regards to how we operate. Things that, we brought the teams together and developed those, came up with those values together, and then we apply them. One of the things that we do is when we have every new starter to the company, they go through an induction program, which is a series of online training materials and videos and interactive, etc., which basically trains them all about the company, the history, all our systems, etc. And a large portion of that sort of is focused around the values itself. Obviously, how do we sort of continue to enforce that? Is we try to engage as much as possible between the office jurisdictions. We try to visit those offices to try to instill that. Promotional materials, and their handouts for the different offices. So it is a challenge, but I think we've been pretty successful in that. Yes, occasionally we have that unique platoon, so to speak, that goes a little bit off the reservation, and that we need to try to pull in. And sometimes that's more challenging, or sometimes it's a little bit easy. It really depends. But like what we usually find, if you can have the right person leading that platoon in that case, or that office, you can generally get that culture to be right, because culture is generally speaking from the top down. Okay. So, one of the things that we still do here is whenever we have a new office manager, we fly them to the corporate office at least for their first week, just so they understand. So when they go back, at the very least, they can ensure that their office is more or less aligned with that culture, which obviously we can continue to instill with time. So yeah, look, it's an ongoing challenge. However, I think we've been quite successful. It's probably one of the things when I was mentioning before, I think year 2, year 3, where we were expanding too quickly, bringing in people, I think we've lost that a little bit. And that also affected morale at the time. But I think now we're far more developed with that. We have better systems and processes to train, control, and monitor. But hey, the reality is we still have a long way to go. And hopefully by the time we hit year 8, we're a little bit better. And year 9, even better than that.
In the same vein as that, we were talking earlier about, you said 23 different nationalities throughout the business. And then when you talk about one of the best things about the military, you said that everyone's working towards achieving the same thing. And, we've talked about this before on the show, that diversity could be a buzzword, but the other half of diversity to be a successful thing for your company, to be an impactful thing, is to have people working towards that same common goal. And so when you're working in these, 16 different countries, 23 different nationalities, aside from just the cultural level of, setting those general values, how do you get everybody working towards that same goal and seeing themselves as part of the whole in that way?
Sure. Look, aside from we have these offices everywhere, and we have these 23 nationalities, our clients, because we support clients entering and doing business in the region, come from all around the world. So what we find is we have 16 countries, 23 nationalities, probably working with clients from another 50 different countries. Okay, so it definitely brings cultural complications. So, how do we get around that? We try to spend a lot of time training internally communication. What I mean by that, communicating within your team, communicating with the client, etc., because a lot of problems actually result because of communication. You can have, for example, the word avocado in one country is called aguacate, in another country is called polta. It's the same thing with different words. And although everyone speaks the same language, so we find training communication is a significant way to, keep that team together, and also from a cultural point of view, try and bridge that gap with our clients. The second thing we do is we basically do systems. So we try to put things in systems as much as possible, because it takes away to some extent the human factor as much as possible. So we try to build, and we have quite a large tech team internally that builds systems that just for us. For example, as a company, we have our own intranet to communicate, to do administrative processes, etc. So we do focus heavily on that. But the reality is, probably the bane of my existence is dealing with problems that the root cause is communication. Because as you can appreciate with these different languages, for example, I had a call last night from a South Korean client who was just finished getting briefed by my corporate operations team, who happens to be Colombians, about services being provided in Mexico by the Mexican team. And by the time you go from the Mexicans through the Colombians through the South Koreans, and they're obviously doing it all in English, so it's nobody's native language, I found that it became a bit like Chinese whispers in regards to what was actually going on. A simple example. The reality is, we spend a lot of time trying to train people how to communicate better. I think that's the most important thing. And it's something that most people take for granted, particularly if they're speaking the same language. They do believe they have an understanding. And I can reflect back on my time in Canada, that, native English as well. But I found there's a number of instances that I was working on these mining companies, and a number of instances that I thought I was saying what was very clear, because we were both speaking English, but I found out later on that actually no one understood what I was talking about. A simple thing is, in Australian English, we have a word called fortnight, which means every 2 weeks. However, in Canada, they don't have this word. So just me saying, okay, great, we'll get together in a fortnight to do, or I need that in a fortnight, I thought it was very clear. They had no idea what I was talking about. So you do have these different challenges, but I think everything comes down to communication, because if people can communicate, on a level, then the reality is relationships and things work. And you could probably even say on a global scale, if people just talked a little bit more and stop resorting to, trying to use guns and the rest of it, we might be a better place.
That makes me think of a conversation I had with one of our good friends, a good friend of the show, Angus Peacock, the other day, talking about some rugby things. And he was talking about
just where he's from, by the way, with a name like Angus Peacock.
Yeah, well, that's probably not too hard to guess.
Yeah. London.
But he was, so he's talking about how when he was as the director of Rugby Colorado, how he would have people inside his organization who would translate his documents from English to American. And it's one of those things that just, shows what you're talking about there, that when we speak the same language, we think we all understand each other, but we really don't. Come on, let's be honest, Dad. If you have a New Yorker talking to somebody in Dallas, you probably need a translator there too. There's all these type of things that the language gets divided up like that. What I'm really curious about, though, kind of staying in that same vein of the language aspect, is how much does like the tone and those type of smaller cultural innuendos play into that? And how do you try to teach that? Because that seems like that's one of those, it's kind of like when you go to Germany, Dad, the first thing they tell you is not to do this, right? I remember that one from 6th grade, but you got all sorts of problems like that. How do you help on those? Because those are so much harder to find than just saying, hey, don't say this word.
Yeah, look, it is. I still remember sitting in, it was in northern Peru. I was running a mining project at the time, and I was giving a briefing or management meeting or something, I can't remember. And I had the logistics manager, the port logistics manager, and he was saying, escúchame, which basically means listen to me. Now, in Spanish, it's quite a common thing to say. It doesn't mean it. But if someone says in English, listen to me, the reality is it can be quite strong. Yes. And in that case, as a simple example, look, I ended up pulling him aside afterwards saying, look, no problems at all. I get exactly what you're trying to tell me, but just be mindful, if you actually said that to someone who didn't understand the translation of how it meant in context, that's actually quite rude. So, there are those things that when you do the translation, it doesn't fit. And here's a simple thing is, generally speaking, English is far shorter and a far more aggressive language. And of course, you can take the next extreme and say German, which is very extreme, in regards to its tone. So it's a quite extreme language. So if you were to write a message in English, it might be 100 words. If you wrote that same message in Spanish, it's probably 140 words, or in German, it might be 50. So sometimes when things are directly translated, it actually doesn't come across the same meaning. So that is one of the things. Here's a perfect example of the day. What was it? I received an email from that was a WhatsApp message from one of my managers. And he goes, such and such is intoxicated and is going home. Okay, now obviously, at least in the general sense, you would think, okay, such and such was drunk and now he's going home, which, okay, but that's a direct translation. What he was trying to say is such and such had food poisoning and was going home. It's a simple translation, but if you use the exact translation, that's what comes up. Now, that's happened before, so I knew exactly what he meant. So there are some of these things, and often one of the things we try to do is to, when we're writing emails, etc. I often ask people, look, fine, if you want to practice your English and write to me, no problem at all. I love that. That's a great thing. But perhaps you can also put the Spanish version below it, or those sorts of things. So the fact that if something doesn't sound right or doesn't come across right, they can actually then check the native language version of it, because often you find the point has been lost. But that's one of the things you do find about Latin America more than most places is people here do want to practice languages. They love languages here. You know, they all want to practice their English, or people who can always speak English and Spanish want to learn Portuguese, etc. I know, particularly where I'm from, Australia, almost nobody wants to learn languages, and it's actually a bit disappointing. You know, in the US, it's a little bit more prominent, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. But you know, you do need to be mindful of not everything translates right. And that can have implications. So, you know, where it's possible, I like things written in the native version. And if there's questions that arise, you can ask the questions for clarifications. But yeah, I mean, there's countless little examples like that that happen on a daily basis.
Are we going to give? Sorry, just real quick, I had to get this in there. Are we going to really give the Germans the title of the most efficient language when really, when it's 50 words, they're just cramming 10 into one? Because we know how. Oh my gosh, I remember that. You add in an adjective, you just throw it onto the word. It doesn't have to be a separate thing. It's an interesting language over there.
Look, it definitely sounds very harsh. I must admit, I did my 3 or 4 months of German in high school. Learned a few words, can say my name is and that sort of stuff. But look, it's no one's going to rush out to learn German because it's a beautiful language.
There you go. There you go. And while we're at it, I just got to say, as a coach, a former rugby coach, I'm extremely disappointed that one of my players, former captain, didn't jump on the communication thing. And you know, because what was the answer? You know, you had 3 standard answers on the club.
Oh yeah,
that we identified as the problem. Anytime something went wrong, these were the 3 problems. You didn't protect the golden egg. You didn't communicate. And there was one more now. I can't.
I think it might have just been 2, because I think that's all we ever said was protect the golden egg and communicate.
Yeah, whenever I'd ask the boys, you know, what went wrong here, and they'd say, "Well, we didn't communication and protect the golden egg, coach." You know. So.
Yeah. Sometimes you look. You know, the military is great for those sorts of catchphrases, etc. But sometimes, you know, it is, and look, that has a purpose. It really does. But sometimes it is healthy to go slightly deeper down to work out exactly what the problem was. But hey, you know, at the end of the day, there is a lot of similarities between the rugby and the military, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and you know, you've talked a little bit about this, but what I'm curious about is, you know, I work with a lot of veteran entrepreneurs, and several of them, probably 50% or so, have aspirations of scaling and going international. What's the biggest hurdle that you could, you know, kind of that lesson learned, watch out for this, or whatever it might be, for entrepreneurs looking to scale beyond, you know, their natural company, I guess, or natural country?
Sure. Look, as I said, you know, we work with, you know, everything from mid-sized companies through to some of the largest companies in the world. And generally the advice I would give them all, don't assume you know everything, and seek advice. Okay, I get it. If you're a small entrepreneur, you probably don't have a large budget, and therefore perhaps, you know, a company like mine or whatever the case may be, you can't contract. But there's still a lot of resources. I know we publish an enormous amount of resources online that's accessible. Try and learn as much as possible. There is too much that people just assume Latin America, as an example, is going to be the same as the US, or is going to be the same as Australia, etc. When the reality is, even from the fundamental level of the legal system itself, which in Latin America either traces itself back to Spain or Portugal predominantly, is just so different. So you need to be, you know, as I was saying before with the leaving the military, you need to be confident but not arrogant, and humble enough to learn, because things are different. It's the same as expanding to a new jurisdiction. Take all the great things you've learned about being successful in your own jurisdiction, but be humble enough to understand and learn that, hey, things are going to be different there, and I will have to pivot slightly. I'll have to rely on that advice. If I have the money, even better, I can reduce my risk and I can use a company like mine or whatever the case may be in order to support me to ensure it's successful. In the end of the day, all we exist for is because we help clients navigate that complexity and we reduce their risk. And also, in many cases, we make things much faster because at the end of the day, for a lot of these companies, time is money. So that's what I would say. It's the same lessons, and I generally find myself coming back to usually the same lessons that usually get applied in most circumstances. So the person who does leave the military and is arrogant and goes to the corporate world or becomes an entrepreneur will probably be the same one who's arrogant when he tries to expand abroad. And in both cases, will probably fail. It's the one that's confident in themselves. And generally, those who are confident in themselves are not actually arrogant. They're willing to learn, they're humble, and usually they're very successful.
I'm really curious. We talked some about lessons you took from your military background, but I have to ask about my sister industry. I got my ag background, and you were working in mining, and so you're the sister on that one. I'm the brother, but I'm curious, what kind of industry specific lessons do you pull from the mining area that you don't think you would have picked up somewhere else?
Sure. Look, I guess think about the military. The military itself was about being available, whether that's equipment, people, whatever the resources were, at a moment's notice to do a job. That's what the military is all about: availability, readiness, whatever the words are. Okay, that was what the military was all about. When you went to mining does operations every single day of the week. So it's not about being availability or readiness. It's about actually operating. So how do you operate more efficiently and have more people, more equipment operating the entire time? So operational efficiency was something that I learned most from. And there's a methodology called Lean. But basically, what we used to do was every 12 hours, which is basically the length of a shift, I would have people line up in front of me, or if I wasn't there, a substitute, and effectively they would have to go up onto a board. On the board itself would have lots of graphs on there. Now the graph for your thing could be, operating hours of this piece of equipment, whatever it was, or how many tons were produced. And it would have a red part, then yellow part, then green part. And they would physically have to mark up there what they achieved during their shift. And obviously, if it's in the red, it wasn't a good shift. Yellow was okay. Green, it was great. So they individually had to publicly mark that, and then they publicly have to tell everybody how they performed. So there's a focus on ever improving operational efficiency, and it's probably in many ways it's like being on military operations. Actually trying to have that. So you're trying to have those trucks, those shovels, and all the other mining equipment working as maximum as possible. For example, a truck driver during a 12-hour shift has a 30-minute break where they will stop and they will have lunch or whatever. What we used to do is we used to hire wives of the different truck drivers, and basically when people stopped for their lunches, which would stagger, these people would jump in and drive a truck for half an hour. Why? It meant that the truck was operating, in only 2 minutes or 3 minutes stopped instead of 30 minutes, because it's about keeping stuff moving. Because at the end of the day, the equipment itself is worth far more than the people operating it from a purely numbers point of view. So, that's something I learned, operational efficiency. It's something that, I take to heart. We try to some extent apply that across what we do now, although it is a little bit different. But it's definitely something that I did learn a lot about.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'd forgotten that because I dabbled a little bit in the oil and gas industry and learned that about, wells. If it's not drilling down, you're losing money. And same thing with even the offshore, ships that do the drilling, and how many hundreds of thousands of dollars a day that you lose if it's not turning down. So that's just a key point. I think when you start to think about true efficiencies in your business, whether you're in the mining industry or oil and gas or whatever, but if you think about the efficiencies of your business, it goes back to what actions am I doing today that create revenue for the business, right? I mean, that's really what it boils down to, and that's a great reminder on that. Well, I'm
And look, as everybody who's got staff, etc., and all these sorts of things, everything you can remove that doesn't directly contribute to revenue, at least today or in the future, is probably something that should be removed, or at the very least thought given to. It's those sorts of things that should be considered. And the reality is, running a small or medium-sized business is revenue fixes all problems.
boy, there's so much truth to that too. Well, I'm curious, what's next with the Biz Latin Hub? What's coming up in the future? The next year or 5 years? What's your vision?
Sure. Look, at the moment, we're still opening new offices every few months, and we're actually in the process at the moment opening new offices in Puerto Rico, in Honduras. So we're probably about 12 months away from having an office in every economy in Latin America and the Caribbean, at least of a significant nature. So really very much what our focus is cementing ourselves to be the largest of what we do in the region. We already are, but the reality is we can still grow, be larger. I'm focused very much at the moment on, I guess, consolidating and trying to build that corporate business, or I guess that corporate structure to support the operational business. And hopefully between us, gentlemen, because obviously this is very private, I'm hoping within the next 2 years, perhaps, that I will be able to, sort of start stepping away from the company and, perhaps find myself spending a little bit more time in front of the beach and enjoying life.
That's a great vision.
Come on, which beach? I'm sure you're going around spending all your time looking out, picking the right spot. So where are you going in 2 to 3 years?
Look, that's a fair point. And look, how I'll answer that question is I currently have a house in Cartagena, Colombia, which is, don't know if you know, but it's one of the parts in Latin America that has the old colonial fort, the walls and all the rest of it. So I have a house there. So I do like spending my time there. So at least for the time being, that's probably where I'll end up. But who knows? The reality is, what I find is for every country I visit, there are things I like and don't like, and just makes me encouraged more to visit more countries because you want to keep learning, you want to keep developing, and it's always interesting.
The Aussies might not let you back. I tried to set you up on that one, Craig, saying that they have the best beaches in the world, and you could get a cut of that tourism check.
Well, yes, let's say Australia's a little bit complicated with entering and leaving at the moment these days, and that is for sure. But one of the things I decided a few years ago is I tried to do something every year. Like 3 years ago, I learned to fly planes. 2 years ago, I learned to sail boats. Last year, I walked up one of the largest mountains in Latin America. So I always try and do something. The reality is, unfortunately, we're all getting older. Actually, my birthday is next week. So yeah, no, it's one of those things that hopefully I'll eventually be allowed to back into Australia. But time will tell on that one.
That's there's a whole lot of funny things that we could go on that one. Believe me. Well, man, this has been great. And what I'm going to shift us to is what we learned. And Camden, I'm going to let you jump on it first this morning.
Really, it was as we were talking through the different cultural aspects of what you do, Craig. I thought back to this, something I've thought about a lot recently, of the importance of understanding the origins and the context and the culture behind language. The example that comes to mind for me that I learned recently was as I was going through learning my own Spanish, as you've been working on, Craig, for your speech this afternoon. But one of the things when you hear people from Hispanic countries speaking English, that specific breed of English, there's never any helping verbs. And it sounds odd to an American to hear that. And then you learn Spanish and you go, oh, they don't have helping verbs. They literally don't have that type of a word. And then all of a sudden the languages start to make more sense and you realize that they're just as intelligent. They get it. Their sentences are just as beautiful. They just literally don't use helping verbs. And so that's my example for it. I know you already had a couple that went through, Craig, but I think just understanding the origins and the context behind those things is so important for communication.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. I didn't think about that one. Mine's a little bit broader sense. I'm stepping up to the 50,000 foot level on this because you said something fairly early on about Latin America and lumping it together. And I tend to do that. I used to do that with the continent of Africa. I hate to say with Africa, because in the US, we've developed this culture of Africa like it's a single entity country. And having spent some time there, you realize very, very quickly that it's not. And so is Latin America. I mean, so is South America, I should say. South America or even Latin America. But when you think about, man, there's a lot of countries there. And each of those countries has its own unique, linguist sort of thing, or whether it's a completely different language, like you said, with Brazil, or just in the culture. And I think we tend to too quickly generalize that in our culture in America, particularly in business. And I think that's a key thing to think about and keep in mind as an entrepreneur. When you scale to other continents, it's not the continent, it's the country. And it may even be smaller culture than that. So I hate that reminder.
Well,
if I just add on.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I just wanted to add on that, it's kind of one of those type moments where, the simple language, I think, paints it very well of why do y'all think there's different countries? Why do you think there's different states? There's a reason that these places aren't all one. It's the same thing like we talked about New York and Texas culturally earlier. Like same type of thing when you get down to Latin America, South America, Europe, Africa, everywhere. There's a reason that they're not together as one country, and it's because they're different. And you got to go there and understand that and take the time to listen.
I was just gonna say, look, it's the same as picking a person from Florida, New York, San Francisco, Texas, and at the very least, they all speak the same language, more or less. And obviously, there's quite a lot of difference there. That's just a simple example when you sort of look at the differences.
Craig, what'd you learn?
Look, what did I learn? It gave me the whole call gave me a sense to reflect a little bit more, to be fair, on my military service. The reality is it's not something I think a lot about. It's obviously quite a long time ago now, for me at least. So it was interesting just to reflect on that. I was walking to work this morning actually thinking about that, going, actually, how did my military service actually, at least support me or help me get to, where I am today? And, I do very much sort of come back to the point that, you very much need to not expect of others that you won't do for yourself. And very much that, you need to be confident in yourself, back yourself, but conversely be humble enough to take advice and to learn.
I appreciate that. And that's a great reminder, is that staying humble and learn, right? How can folks connect with you, learn more about what's going on with Biz Latin Hub, and maybe even, do some business with you?
Sure, perfect. Look, I'll just move out of the way. Look, this is the company logo. Effectively, just find us online. If you type in Biz Latin Hub, we will be the first, without a doubt. To be fair, if you type in most things to do about doing business or incorporating companies, etc., in the region, you will find us. So, look, find us online. Conversely, look, I do have a LinkedIn profile as well. Look, reach out to. Always happy to have a chat. At the end of the day, where I can, support people and help people to achieve success as well. At the end of the day, what do people say? It's about how you can help others that, is the most valuable thing in life.
That's great. I appreciate that. And man, it's been a pleasure having you around, carving some time out of the business anniversary birthday celebrations and spending it with us. Camden.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's show. Special thanks to our guest, Craig Dempsey, for joining us today, and to our sponsor, Tribe and Purpose. Find your tribe, find your purpose. You can check out recent episodes of The Cam and Otis Show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and check out a full archive at thecamandotisshow.buzzsprout.com. The Cam and Otis Show is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next week.